Hello, welcome to what I consider to be the most fun bit of looking at the London Naval Conference and Treaty of 1930. What if they failed to make any sort of agreement? So I've been working on this with Alex Clarke. I would highly recommend you go and find him on YouTube, on Twitter as @AC_Naval History. He podcasts the bilge pumps via SimSec, which you can find at the podcast provider of your choice, or on Apple if you're part of the iCult. He's got a Discord that's very friendly, and he does Patreon. So, capital ships without the additional impositions of the London Naval Treaty. Well, what did the London Naval Treaty really add? What did it not? So, Washington Naval Treaty had set out a slightly complex to work out arrangement of ships aging out and being able to be replaced by ships which were limited to the 35,000 tons standard displacement and 16-inch guns maximum. You also had the limited total tonnages for everyone. And going into 1930, those are, I've got put up there the allowances that people had. It's worth saying that France and Italy had particularly old ships, even in 1930, let alone in 1922, when this was all agreed, and so they were allowed to swap them early. But so they were over tonnage but under capability. The treaty limits apply because they were written by some fairly sensible people who were trying to avoid loopholes to exploit. So the terms of the Washington Naval Treaty are that you can't build a ship that's going to break those 35,000 ton displacement and 16-inch gun rules for yourself, for somebody else, as a contract, whatever, until the end of the treaty, which is 31st of December 1936 or the 1st of January 1937. So if you're going to stick by the treaty, you can't announce that you're going to build something that's oversized. You could lie. I think the Japanese kind of started lying. Everyone was lying to some extent with in real history, but according to the rules, you can't start building or laying down anything that's going to be bigger than 35,000 tons standard displacement or have guns that are bigger than 16-inch until after the 1st of January 1937, which they worked on a theory that ships would take 3 years to build, to go from laying down to getting into service, which is probably about right. So, what's going to happen? Royal Navy, going to slightly complicated. So the new ships are given letters. A and B had been the Nelson class. There they'd gone for armour and armament over speed. Probably, in retrospect, a mistake because it kept them back, meant they didn't really have anything that could chase down bigger, faster, nastier things. By 1929, you've got the Panzerschiff being conceived of. The French are then starting to go down their small capital ship line that's going to end up with the Dunkirks to chase them down and kill them, etc. So ships C and D are going to be laid down in 1931. They're due to enter service in 1934, and they're going to replace 4 13.5-inch gun armed battleships of the Iron Duke class. So what do I think the Royal Navy wants, needs. I hope that they have by this stage realised that speed is really the big thing, that you really are going to be wanting, because there is the holy trinity of tank design of speed, protection, and firepower. Whatever you might say about that, I know that military history Visualize has worked out that there's at least 9 parameters, he reckons, that are important, but nonetheless, you need to have the mobility, which in the case of ships is speed to get to trouble and to control the situation, or else the enemy is just going to dart in, pick you apart, and dart out of range again. That's what battle cruisers were supposed to do. Although by this stage you're kind of probably looking at a heavy battleship design. The Royal Navy might still call them battle cruisers. But in John Jordan's excellent book, Warships After Washington, he talks about the other option compared with the Nelson class, which was a cut-down G3 design, which was the F2 or F3. The letter designates that it's the generation after the G because battle cruisers went down the alphabet from a kind of arbitrary midpoint. The N3 design is because the battleships went up, so the Nelson class were the O class, and then you get P, Q, R, whatever. So F2, F3, and then you use a 2 if it's going to be a twin gun turret, and a 3 if it's going to be a triple gun turret. And the idea had been to use either twin or triple 15-inch guns on a ship which would have perfectly respectable armour, and then if you go for the triple guns, you get a 28.5 knot speed. If you go for the twin guns, you get a 29.5 knot speed. And bear in mind, this is 1921 designs. We're now talking 10 years later. So you're getting a lot more. You're potentially getting a lot more oomph for your weight and space of machinery. Those ships were also, because they were designed at about the same time as the Nelson class, they've got 6-inch guns as their secondaries, albeit in turrets. Hopefully by now you can look at having a dual-purpose secondary armament that's going to be more akin to your destroyers, so sort of 4.5, 4.7-inch guns in dual-purpose mounts would be ideal. The F2, F3 designs had the same idea as the Nelson class, so they had all guns forward of the superstructure. I understand that the reason that when you came to the King George V class of the kind of 30s, 40s, the reason you get a shift back to a more conventional division of the gun positions is because the benefits were felt to be less, given that you were now armouring a citadel against air attack much more, and you kind of so sort of the benefits are possibly less clear, and the anti-aircraft capabilities of the Nelson class kind of covering their forward arcs was a compromise and questionable. So fingers crossed the Royal Navy is going to go that way and build up some battle cruisers. Now, after C&D, so they're laid down in 1931 to enter service in 1934. This is according to the complicated replacement schedules, which kind of allow you to replace a ship once it gets to 20 years old, after laying down, I think. So you now have the option of E and F coming along. You can lay them down in 32, enter service in 35. But, and this is a big but, yes, you're going to get rid of HMS Tiger, which has 13.5-inch guns, but, you know, let's be honest here, you're building the F2 or F3 class, depending on whether you are going to risk a triple turret or whether you're going to go for a twin turret. I suppose another option would be, especially if you're going with the 4.5 build, to have a 4 twin turrets, because the Nelson class's triple turrets by 1931 had been in service for 4 years and I think had yet to fire a proper series of salvos successfully from either of the ships. So I think triple turrets at that size were not popular with the Royal Navy, and the 16-inch gun was possibly becoming clear that it wasn't really the game changer for the British that it was for other people. The US went 14 to 16. The British had a really good 15-inch gun. Let's just stick with 15-inch guns. They work, they're good. We've got turrets that work in twin mountings. Just stick with what works. British tendency is reliability over innovation. In most of these sorts of things, let's just go with that. Go with what works. Make sure it'll work. After sailing quite a long distance to go and find the enemy, if you're having to fight them in the Far East, and make sure it'll actually work on the day of battle, whenever that might be, because you can't predict, because you're not going to be the one starting the war, certainly not against a peer opponent, unlike some of the other navies' ways of working. But, and this is the key thing, I don't want to get rid of the Queen Elizabeth class. They actually are significantly better than the Royal Sovereign class that followed them, the R-class battleships. Also, I mean, what kind of animal would scrap Warspite? Okay, the post-war British government after World War II. But they gave us the NHS, so, yeah. Yeah, if you're going to scrap Warspite, you need to give me an NHS or an equivalent. And given that the NHS is pretty much the British national religion, I wouldn't do that. But you can do complicated things. You can defer your builds and delay, so you don't have to follow that pattern of replacement that's set out in these complicated tables. It's just kind of telling you what's coming due, what's kind of coming up to age. Yeah. The US Navy entering this era, and every single capital ship is stuck at 21 knots. Only 3 of those 21 knot ships have 16-inch guns. You've got 4 ships which are still carrying 12-inch guns, and you've got a group in the middle of 11 ships with 14-inch guns. This is a struggle somewhat to be competitive. When the Royal Navy has nothing with 12 inches, they have got rid of more of their 13.5-inch gun-armed ships, which might be seen as equivalent to 14-inch guns, and they're moving to having much more of their battleship fleet with 15, and they're not quite as good as advertised 16-inch guns. So, as with the Royal Navy, the US Navy can build C&D in 31 to come into service in 34, E and F to come into service in 35. That's going to take out of the fleet Florida, Utah, Wyoming, Arkansas, New York, and Texas. I'll be honest, some of them are perfectly pretty ships. I know that the USS Texas is preserved, albeit struggling. Please do try and help to support them in any way you can, because it would be a tragedy for the USS Texas to be allowed to rust into oblivion. But I'm not going to miss them as ships in the battle line if I can do what I think the US Navy is going to want to do, which is go for something faster. So my vision of this, now At this point, you know that the Japanese, pretty much all their battleships, are able to go faster than you are. The Royal Navy are faster than you are. Okay, not hugely, at 23, 24 knots, but it's not nothing. And you've seen the example of the way that the Queen Elizabeth class operated for the Grand Fleet in World War I, and how they were supposed to have worked had they not been swaps for the Battle of Jutland with battle cruisers. Yeah, so the concept is understood, and the Americans do seem to have been fairly fascinated by the Battle of Jutland. So, what would I do? So you've got 3 years of replacement cycle, and I would take that force where I can build 6 new battleships, or capital ships, and I would be building fast battleships. And I'll explain what I would do. And then once you've replaced those ones, you're then getting a slightly complicated thing that your tonnage you're freeing up starts to shift a bit. So you're not necessarily freeing up quite as much to be building quite so many big ships. And given you're still going to have the legacy ships like the Colorado class around for a while, I would then be looking at maybe something a bit slower. But by a bit slower, I'm still talking like 26 knots, 25 knots, rather than 21 knots. But not necessarily going for the kind of 28 to 30 knots that you're actually going for. So, but that's a little bit too far through, and I'm not really trying to push this what if that far, because I think that too much will change for me to make any sort of prediction without fixing on a concept here. That's kind of the difference between speculative fiction, alternate history, and this kind of counterfactual history. Apparently, I don't know. So the US fast battleship, what I would do, you've got the 16-inch guns that you've used in nice twin turrets in the Colorado class. You've been playing with that for a long time. You could probably tweak it a little bit to make it better, but realistically, I'm going to go with that. Certainly the North Carolina's triple turrets are a lot heavier, and I would go with 4 twin turrets. It's going to probably be very much like the Royal Navy's designs. I would go with 2 turrets forward, 2 turrets aft. I'd give them lots of twin 5-inch 38 caliber dual purpose secondaries. I'd give it good armor. I'd give it a speed of at least 28 knots. You might manage 30. The Americans were a lot happier pushing the limits of kind of boiler technology, pressures, and heats than the Royal Navy was for equivalents. I'd be going for that. Aviation facilities, I wouldn't. I would, because what we've got at this stage that is a difference is we've got the scout cruiser, the scout carriers. That's their job, really. I don't see a need for you to be carrying your own aircraft as the capital ship. It's unnecessary weight. The role it's going to play can be done by an aircraft launched by another ship, and you would expect to have that auxiliary. It's really not that different what I'm talking about from the North Carolina, except I'm using the twin turrets rather than triples. But yeah, and that's partly to do with sort of when you're developing the North Carolinas versus this new fast battleship class to kind of generate stuff. So that's that one.